The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Top 10 Reasons Why Contractors Succeed. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You should see something on your computer desktop to the right-hand corner. That's your GoToWebinar control panel. When you join today's webinar, you selected to join either by phone call or computer audio. If for any reason you would like to change your selection, you can do so by accessing your audio pane in your control panel. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of your control panel. You may send your questions in at any time. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. If you would prefer to ask your question verbally, you may raise your hand by clicking on the hand raising icon on the Grab tab at the top left of your control panel. If you've joined by phone call, please enter your PIN number, which can be found in the audio pane of your control panel, so that we may unmute your line and you may ask your question. I'd now like to turn it over to today's host, Greg Lyon.
Thanks, Lori, and good afternoon, everyone. Actually, those on the West Coast, good morning. My name is Greg Lyon. I am the head of our Strategic Initiatives group here for Contract Surety here in Hartford. I just want to say thank you to everybody for joining us today. Looks like we have a pretty good-sized group, which is really exciting to see, and we're anxious to do the webinar. Hopefully, all of you had a chance to view Bob Rainey's video, which was included as part of the invite you received, and you heard some of his thoughts on what Wayne and Dennis are going to be talking about today. Reasons contractors succeed. As you might imagine, we've gotten to know Wayne and Dennis and the whole team at FBI really well over the past couple of years, and we've really developed a high appreciation for the insight that they gain from their clients that they work with day in and day out. So I think, we're all pretty confident that you're going to enjoy the presentation today, and hopefully we can make it more of a dialogue and you can ask some questions. I know Wayne and Dennis would certainly appreciate that. We're excited to bring the webinar to you today, as well as this is a series of webinars we're doing with Wayne and the group at FBI. This is the second of 4 we're going to do this year. So we do ask for your feedback. We welcome your feedback. Love to hear from everybody, either through today's webinar or from emails after the fact. We'd love to get your feedback on how this works for you. We're doing this for you, whether you're an agent, whether you're one of our contractor clients, or one of our underwriters. These are being done in hope that they're valuable to all of you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Wayne and Dennis and then get going with their presentation.
Thank you, Greg. We appreciate the introduction. Welcome, everyone. We're happy to, hopefully dissemble a little bit of valuable information here. We'll see. You'll be the judges, right? So go ahead and mark your calendar for September 13th of 2018. That's our next webinar. So that will be a Thursday as well, September the 13th at 1 p.m. Eastern. And mark your calendar. What's going to happen after this webinar is you're going to get some stuff. So you'll get an email tomorrow with the PowerPoint presentation attached. You'll also get our new white paper, the top 10 reasons contractors succeed. And finally, you'll get the webinar recording itself. And in that email that you get will also be contact info for us, just in case you have a question you didn't feel comfortable presenting in front of the whole group. That will be fine. We're an open book. You can send us anything you want. Okie doke. So quick disclaimer, what we'll talk about today is, Dennis and I got a little frustrated with all these things that are out there in the world about why contractors fail and why this bad thing happens. And we're like, well, how come nobody talks about contractor success? And really, if you think about it, what we're going to be talking about are some of the universals of business success, but specifically this is going to be for contractors. Then ultimately, if we do deliver some success strategies, how do you put it all together? What's the secret potion? So everybody, whether you're an agent, or whether you're an underwriter, or whether you're a contractor, you really only want 2 things in life. This is true for all of us in the business world, I think. You want business prosperity and you want a beautiful family life. So, business prosperity and family harmony, that's what we're all about here at FBI. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Dennis because we want to talk about first what does success even look like? I mean, how do we even put a wrapper around the term success?
Well, and I hate to say it because I'm sort of neglectful of one element of this, but what we try to do in our peer programs is we try to share best practices, share the things that are successful from contractor to contractor, and that's really the basis of our whole program. So, Wayne, can you move to the next slide?
Sure.
If you look at the results of our members, financial results are well in excess of the general construction industry. And we think that comes from the general sharing that goes on, and also the peer pressure and support that each of the members gets from their folks, and
accountability too.
And accountability, and from the program itself. So what we're going to be talking about in these 10 reasons contractors succeed, what this comes from is each year I go back and actually try to pick out of our 200 some contractors in our program, try to pick out the top 15% or so. And then what I do is I try to analyze those top 15 as to see what are the characteristics that made them the most successful. And now this is sort of on financial parameters as opposed to life success parameters. So,
well, that's harder to measure.
Yeah, which I can't really measure, but I do find that these folks generally, the more business successful, do seem to be able to have a good life as well. So what we try to do in this is really try to identify the things that they had in common. The most successful over the past several years had in common what they were doing right that really made the difference for them. And that's where our top 10 reasons really come from.
So the first characteristic for successful contractors is leadership. And leadership is notoriously hard to define. If you check, the last time I checked Amazon books for books about leadership, there were something like 24,000 different books on leadership that you could get. That's a lot. And each one has a slightly different definition of what leadership is. But we know what bad leadership results in, right? So we want to focus our clients and you guys on the phone. We want to focus you guys on the successful and positive aspects of leadership.
Well, the first thing I wanted to cover, you're seeing a few subheadings there, but the first thing I wanted to cover is that leadership is not necessarily an individual thing in these businesses. There are multiple people that compose leadership. In our most recent business, our peer group, it was apparent that the very top leader in the host company was well beloved. Most people stated right out that this fellow was the reason that they were working for that company and would stay working for that company. Yet when we measured them with a survey, they rated leadership just as good and not great. And when I first saw that, that kind of took me aback. But then as we got through the detail, there were a couple of mid-level leaders within the company that were seen as a barrier or not as positive as senior leadership. So I wanted to relate back to one of the things that I found the characteristics of success is some of the most successful companies actually had multi-ownership as well as multi-leadership, and the entire leadership team was seen as positive and pretty strong leaders. So the most successful had good leadership, and that is not just the top leader. But when you do look at good leadership in the top leader, the concept of servant leadership certainly continues to chime through. Human beings just have an easy way of finding out who's in it for themselves versus who's in it for the good of everybody else. And, that just simple characteristic, or on the other side, call it a fatal flaw. Selfishness is a fatal flaw of leadership. People recognize that very easily and very early, I think. So when you have servant leaders, and I think 100% of our people, when they look to the next generation, is looking for that servant leadership characteristic. somebody who's going to do good for the organization, good for the employees, as well as be a successful, driven business person. So part of successful leadership is actually how you spend your time. And if you think about it, you probably spend your time at work doing one of three things. You're either doing leadership activities, which may be culture related, or you're doing managing activities. You're managing your people, setting goals, measuring their performance, that sort of thing. Or you're actually doing the work of the business, working on a bid, or working to get a customer, or giving a presentation, those sorts of things. So depending
and by the way, those aren't split 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. The last one tends to consume about 96% of our typical customer's time.
Well, and particularly in smaller companies, and the fact of the matter is, in a smaller company, it oftentimes has to. But if you're not spending any time on the actual leadership part of your duties or the culture building part of your duties, you're probably not serving your company well or serving yourself well. So what you need to do is you need to have a balance of those things. So, we always boil it down to working in the business or on the business. And, when you think of you're working in the business, doing the work of the business, that might get, solidify your work with an individual customer or solve an individual job problem. But when you're working on the business, hopefully you're working to get 10 customers, to solve 10 problems, or more importantly, probably prevent 10 problems from happening by having good systems, or by having driven, motivated people, or being able to attract the best people. So try to think of leadership broadly. And let's go ahead and move on to the next item here. So, great place to work. I guess you know it when you see it. I mean, that's one thing, and I guess you know it when you don't see it also. I've been in some companies that have gone from a great place to work to a not very good place to work, and oftentimes it's just the subtle difference. In the case I'm thinking of, there was a retirement of a couple of old Italian gentlemen that happened to sort of be the glue of the organization. They were the guys that would take the new guy under their arm, maybe invite him out for a drink after work, or invite him to a cookout on the weekend. But they were kind of the glue of the organization. And when they retired, nobody noticed that there was a lack there. But come back about a year later, and people are jumping ship. So
this wasn't the CEO or the president. These were manager types that
retired. Right. Not the ultimate leader. So what it goes to show is that there are subtle differences that happen in your organization that make it a great place to work. And in most cases, money shouldn't be the primary motivator. If it does rely on money, then you're always going to have folks looking for the next person who will pay them more. So what do employees want? They want the why. You probably hear that a lot today, especially with the millennials, but they do want a why. They need a compelling vision. That goes back to the leadership, right? If the leader's able to put forth a compelling vision for where the company is going and why you're working 55 hours at times and things like that, that helps the organization be a great place to work. One of the things that's come across very recently is community involvement. I find that the best cultures have the most community involvement. And when I say community involvement, that's not just turning around and giving dollars. Oftentimes, the company employees are participating together, building a habitat house or something like that. So it helps also, by the way, to be winning. I think in construction, there's a lot of competitive people. So how you communicate the company wins, whether it's winning a bid, getting a new customer, or just catching somebody doing something right in your business and making a big splash about it to the rest of the team. Those are the things that I see that seem to separate.
Yeah, and the idea of what employees want is so critical, because if you are a servant leader, you're starting from the position not top down. I'm going to impose my vision on this company. Great leaders let things bubble up from the bottom. They can be bottom up leaders and collegial leaders, not just top down dictatorial types.
Yeah. I do want to cover one other thing on the Great Place to Work, if you don't mind, Wayne. Great organizations, and in construction, one of the things I've found through our peer groups again is that when there's a construction problem and it does not come to light early enough, it just gets more and more expensive. And I think, when you look at bonding failures over time, if most of those problems, if found early, addressed aggressively, could be solved. One of the important things of a great culture and a great place to work is that people aren't afraid to bring their problems up the chain to management and ask for help. So you've got to make sure that you have psychological safety in your business and that people are willing to bring their problems up, that it's not a punishment system.
Right.
It's a reward system. And
exactly right.
So that kind of ties into the leadership as well. So attracting the best people. And I guess this would probably be a simple one, right? And many of us are sports fans and we watch sports on weekend and we hear about great coaches. But if you've heard any of the great coaches talk, they'll let you know that it's easy to win when you have the best players, right?
That's right.
When you have LeBron James, your odds of winning a basketball game are a lot better than they are with some other folks leading your team. So how do you attract the best people? And frankly, a lot of it goes back to the first two things we already talked about.
Right. That's right.
So, you've got to try to assemble the best team. And so you want to make sure the best and the brightest have a pathway to fulfillment of their career, to be able to advance in the company. You want to make sure the ones you do get in, because remember, everybody knows what to say at the interview. Mm-hmm. So everybody sounds good at the interview, but when you get them in, if they aren't the right fit, get them out fast. And frankly, one of your obligations as a leader to the rest of your team is to make sure that their teammates are people that they'll want to work with. So when you get somebody in and you find that they're not a fit, especially in construction, I think because we're such nice people, we just hate putting anybody out to the curb. But,
that's right.
But you've got to think of the betterment of the whole company.
That's right.
And, one person can drag down the team. We find that a good story I could tell you is about a mechanical contractor that grew very rapidly 3 years ago, and they ended up having to spend, believe it or not, $5 million in temporary labor that year.
Wow.
Well, what they found is not only did that cost them money, but they dragged down the performance of all the other team members who had to work side by side.
Yeah.
And then the next year, they actually drew back a little in their revenue and their profit went way up. The following year, they grew again, and they still had to add a lot of temps and the profit went down again. So I'm not sure the lesson was learned, but there is clearly a lesson there that people perform better when their teammates are,
right.
Are of like mind and like motivation and all of that.
This will be coming out in the Wall Street Journal blog here soon, but the old-fashioned way of interview somebody and look at their resume for their technical qualifications is so flawed. It's just amazing. So we've actually seeing our peer group members. We're learning from them, of course, and they're getting more and more enlightened about how to attract good people on board. They're doing psychological profiling instruments. They're doing practical work-related assignments to really, it's easy for a guy to sit there and tell you that I'm a terrific estimator. Well, okay, great. Here's a rough drawing on a napkin. Give me a conceptual estimate. I mean, that just seems like an easy, if you're a great estimator, that should be something easy to put together, right? They're doing team interviews. They're doing all kinds of things because the basic interview process is so flawed. And I know that I'm already stepping on toes, but most of you in the listening audience think you have an innate sixth sense about people. You don't. Don't delude yourself. You can be as fooled as anybody else, and 50% of your hires are flops. And that's just a fact. So if you want to get better, you've got to learn new techniques. And let me recommend a book to you. It's really transformational. It's simply called Who, W-H-O, Who. And it is an outstanding book. If you followed the scripts in this book, the quality of your hiring will go through the roof. I didn't write it. I'm not trying to sell books for anybody else, But it is a terrific book, and I recommend it to everyone.
So all that said, if you want to have the best team, really the best philosophy is to grow from within. So the unfortunate part of that philosophy is if you've sold more projects than your people can run, you might need a superintendent or a project manager now, who is capable. And frankly, that's what's going on in the construction industry. So the fight for people, you have companies that have outkicked their coverage, and now they got to add a or B level super or project manager immediately, and they're willing to pay $20,000 to $30,000 over market. The best way to get a raise in the construction business right now is to change jobs.
That's right.
And there is always somebody willing to pay $20,000 more. So the best thing to do is to use the long-term approach, so you get caught less and less in having to add people at the last minute where so many mistakes are made. So growing from within, and although I'll go back, so if you're going to grow from within, you need raw material. So you have to be able to attract the good talent from the good engineering universities. And if you're a rural guy, oftentimes it's the more local construction programs or engineering, because the guy from Georgia Tech is not going to go work in the middle of the country in some other state, right?
That's right.
They tend to be drawn to the larger cities or where they're from. So
one of our Midwestern contractors in a small town, it's a ENR 100 contractor, but they are in a very rural area, and they're actually recruiting in the junior high schools now to do exactly what you're saying. And they've gotten away from the mindset of just-in-time hiring. In other words, oh my gosh, we've got a huge project coming online. We're going to need 3 more superintendents and another project manager. Well, they've gotten away from that, and they're very planful about attracting work and selecting jobs so that they know that they can staff them. And they've got a bench that's building buildings ever so slowly, and they are developing their talent to meet their future workload.
Yeah, and then the second best way to attract workers is really internal referrals, and more of our clients have strong internal referral bonus programs where, if you go to the West Coast, I can tell you that people are paying their own people $10,000 referral fees for superintendents and project managers that they bring in. But if you have a good culture already, your people are unlikely to bring in somebody that they don't think will fit.
Well, that's right.
And so the second best way to grow is really through your own people, and some folks have had some pretty good programs for that.
Yeah, LeBron James, being an all-star player, is not going to invite me to play on his team. He knows that my performance is only going to drag his team down. So an all-star performer wants to attract other all-star performers.
Yeah, we hope that doesn't apply to giving webinars as well, Wayne. So the last item there, be the employer of choice in your region. And when I look at our most successful companies, what I see when I look at them is they have a buzz. People want to work there, and it's actually known. There's a spread of information among the people in the industry that that's the best place to work. They're not always the best paying, but it's the best place to work. And if you can get that buzz, that will take care of all of your other issues and problems with regard to getting the right team together.
But it strikes me as we talk about these items, Dennis, that none of this stuff, you can't wake up tomorrow and say, I'm an employer of choice today, right? These are things that require that the senior leaders work on the business versus working in the business. These are cultural things. They require leadership, time, treasure, and attention.
Yeah, and that really brings us to our next topic, which is strategic planning. And even going back to, having enough raw material and growing people from within, that happens a lot better with strategic planning. When you're looking forward and you're looking at the future needs of your organization and you're able to prepare for those future needs over time, that makes such a difference. If you're only operating in the now, it's really hard to move forward because you oftentimes get one step back for every step forward. So Wayne's showing you some statistics here, which are pretty amazing. The first 2 bars in this graph, you actually saw at the start of this, which is the performance of our peer members versus the performance of the industry. And then the blue bar represents the performance of our peer members who did strategic planning starting at least 3 years ago. And, there's a pretty clear message here that planning works. It's simple as that.
It pays off.
And good strategic planning works even better.
It really, and that's a good point, because I've seen some real garbage. In the last few years, people send us their documents and say, hey, how can we improve this plan or that? And holy moly, there's a lot of people out there charging a lot of money for really poor work product. I guess contractors would say the same thing, right?
Yeah.
But quality should be self-evident. And if you're not seeing the numbers, your numbers improve like this, then you might have a quality issue there.
Yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is it in strategic planning that actually makes it work and results in success. So you see the first bullet point there, the process, the vision. That goes back to our leadership piece again. Having a compelling vision for the company and where it's going. And then coming back to the process that seems to work best is a broad process. The more people you can include in the whole process, and that doesn't necessarily mean, the top level strategic isn't done by a smaller group, but the overall strategic process, including the implementation, the broader you can spread that through the organization and get everybody working in the same direction, that's going to increase your chances for results.
I actually saw a beautiful strategic plan and a wonderful vision, really a vision that touched your heart by three owners in a northeastern state. And I just was so proud of them. They really had embraced the idea of their vision and their values. And then when we did a little bit deeper analysis, we found out that they had never communicated the vision, values, and plan outside of the three of them. And when I finally found that out, my head almost exploded. I was like, well, guys, what are you doing? You've done all this work. You've paid all these thousands to a consultant to do all this stuff. And none of your people in the field that are actually executing the work on your behalf, none of them know it. I was flabbergasted. I know that in our most successful companies, they're pushing out the values and the vision and the mission and elements of the plan all the way down to the newest employee. When somebody walks in the door here as a new employee, the first thing we do is we go over our values, and they get a copy of the strategic plan. So it's utterly transparent, including all of the financial milestones that we have. And why wouldn't you be transparent? If you're hiring smart people, they already have these questions. Why wouldn't you help them answer those questions?
Yeah. So to the specific goals and milestones, there's an old saying that if you don't have a plan, any road will get you there, right? Yeah. Well, what's amazing actually to me is I look back again at these most successful companies, and over time, I look back at the goals they set 3, 4, and 5 years ago, and darned if they just aren't right on almost always, sometimes exceeding. And of course, all of construction's never a straight line growth or anything else, because one job can throw that out of kilter, or a slight economic hiccup in your region. It's never a straight line, but over 3, 4, 5 years, people set goals and then they achieve them. And there's a study back here a long time ago, actually, that showed just the process of setting a goal helps with success in achievement. And if you share that goal, that success multiplies.
That's right. And that's a great point. When I see the actual results, our client results come in, it's kind of shocking, really. Nobody doubles or triples their goals. In other words, if their goal is to be 100 million, they don't end up at 200 or 300 million. They kind of hit right on it. They end up at 104 million or 101.2 million or something like that. It is amazing how accurate they become in their forecasting, because goal setting and strategic planning, you're building up those muscles. And year one, you might miss your budget by quite a bit. Year two, you get close to year three, you're right on it. And after that, boy, it's just Katie bar the door.
Yeah. So having said all that, revenue growth in and of itself, I would normally call the revenue fallacy. A certain amount of revenue and setting that as a goal is not the be all end all in strategic planning. That is not it. But, if you read Level Headed, Doug Pruitt's book, you'll find that, they set a BHAG of, I forget, it was 110 and 100 or something, and it was $1 billion in revenue. And I heard this week of a company that just passed $1 billion in revenue, and I heard their goal was to do $5 billion in 5 years.
Golly.
And to me, that's just the most stupid
That's ridiculous.
idea in the world. But, if they have the right plan and the right path and the right reasons for getting there, they could do so. So what most of our strategic plans that I see are, number one, they're driven by other reasons. In a lot of cases in today's world, some companies are doing so well that their growth is simply meeting the pent-up demand of their satisfied customers. And that's sort of where we usually direct growth when we're in business planning, is we look at the opportunities that are presented by these already good companies, and we just want them to try to grow their organization to be capable of handling the growth that's already out there.
Right.
So usually most of the plans we have are organizationally and operationally focused, but by growing the organization's capabilities, they then have the ability to produce more revenue and do it profitably.
Right, and it's some of the goals and milestones that you put into the plan might not have anything to do with revenue. Well, you probably always want a revenue goal in there and a profit goal, but it could have things that could have to do with customer satisfaction, employee morale, quality of life for the leadership team. I mean, you name it. There could be a lot of different elements that go into goal setting that have to do with quality of life, not just money and profits.
So looking forward at some of the other aspects, when we're looking at strategic planning, what we're trying to do oftentimes is a lot of analysis of what the company has done, what has it been successful with, what has it not been successful with. And I know this won't sound like rocket science, but generally speaking, we're looking to do more of what's successful and less of what's not successful.
Yeah.
And it's amazing, though, sometimes folks haven't done the analysis to really understand where they haven't been successful and have been successful. Maybe they had a whole lot of schoolwork and that seems great, but you look back and they average 2.5% on 60% of their revenue, and their overhead's at 3.5%.
Yeah.
And you go, now what part of this am I missing exactly?
Yeah.
So, it sounds simple, but that's really a good part of it. In a lot of cases, I love Jim Collins' book, Good to Great. In a lot of cases, we use their hedgehog concept. That hedgehog concept, for those of you who read the book may recall, it asks you, at what can we be the very best? It asks about what are we the most passionate? And then what is the single equation that defines success for our industry? Mm-hmm. So we like to make sure that our companies understand who they really are and what they can be successful with, and simply to try to grow in the areas, where you're most capable and most success and can differentiate yourself from your customers. So, this next slide really shows just one thing, that strategic planning is not a single event.
Yeah, that's always bothered me, because whenever we bring up the term strategic planning, people roll their eyes and they say, oh, we did a strategic plan 15 years ago and it was a piece of junk, and this consultant charged us a bunch of money, and there's a 3-ring binder on the shelf in the conference room gathering dust. We've never used it. It was a waste of our time. And I mean, the fact is that big 3-ring binder is not the reason that any plan succeeds. The reason the plan succeeds is the team came together and worked on the business and dreamed and set out mileposts and goals and set out then to achieve them as a team. And if somebody comes in and they charge you a ton of money and they give you some kind of written document, that's all well and good. But if you don't have a cycle, you don't go to the gym once and find yourself having lost 30 pounds and put on 5 pounds of muscle. You've got to go in there every day for 2 years to make that happen, perhaps. It's the same thing with strategic planning. Keep building those muscles. Keep going into the strategic planning gym, and the more you do it, the more success you'll have. But the idea of getting a binder, and that magic binder is supposed to leap off the shelf and help you manage your construction firm better, well, that's idiocy.
Yeah, and there's a great saying, I think it was from Winston Churchill, that even an average plan, well executed, will be more effective than a great plan poorly executed. So I think the key to good strategic planning is really, in the end, that step-by-step implementation plan. Even that company that set the $5 billion goal, if they have clear steps that'll get them there, and they don't outkick their coverage to where they're selling and not producing, that it's certainly possible, and it's maybe even possible to do successfully with the right steps. So our next item is being effective at essentially getting business. And, no contractor can succeed unless they got work to do. So that's really kind of a simple statement as well. But what's interesting in construction is work is acquired in so many different ways, from, the traditional bid method to negotiated work to the competitive CM environment out there, with the dog and pony shows.
Highway
and all
heavy
of
does
that.
it different from builders who do it different from trades. It's all over the place.
Yeah. So a couple of things, again, looking at our most successful contractors that we see is, one is they have lifetime customers. And what do I mean by a lifetime customer? It's somebody with a repeat building program that stays with them year over year over year. You might look over a 20-year period and see $10 million in gross profit from that single customer. So it's the lifetime value that they get. But by having those repeat customers, they don't have to regenerate their business from scratch every year. So companies with more repeat customers, true lifetime, true negotiated customers, they tend to be the most successful. The next point here is differentiators. Kind of goes back to our strategic planning thing. You got to know who you are and what your advantage is over everyone else. And what's happened in the contracting business now is there's a lot of competition at what I'd call the commodity level of the market, the CM, competitive CM with open fee competition. Mm-hmm. And I saw an interesting statistic here just a couple of weeks ago that showed that the public companies in construction are actually declining in profitability, while the rest of the industry is increasing in profitability. And the conclusion I draw from that is not necessarily scientifically drawn, but there's certainly some visual science behind it, is that they are participating too largely in the commodity part of the market. All right. So differentiate yourself so you can use your value where you bring value to get more business. Next thing, just the bidding thing, a couple different things I wanted to say about bidding. Just very quickly, there are a lot of different bid strategies that seem to be effective. I've seen folks, bid a lot with a low capture rate, but at a high margin. And I see others who are very selective in what they bid, and then they pour a lot of time into finding their advantages, and they're successful that way. And then I've seen them kind of in the middle as well. So, and I've heard a lot of folks among our most successful people just look for the ugly, the difficult, the under the radar, and they have a lot of success in those. So, a lot of different ways to go there. And BD, just a couple of comments. Business development, I probably see more failures than successes in
right.
Hiring and operating business development.
Well, part of it gets back to what we said before about everybody having this gut instinct that this guy's going to be great at BD, and they haven't put him to any test to see if the person is actually capable of selling construction services. Yeah,
so look for likability. People buy from people they like. So you got to have high likability, and you need relationships. A business development person that gets you the right to bid competitively with a whole lot of other people, that's not giving you any advantage.
Not at all.
You need a relationship. The idea is to get relationships that give you an advantaged look. So make sure your business development's around specific relationships targeted toward lifetime customers. Did you go forward? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So diversified and profitable work mix. This again kind of comes back to my commodity discussion. Our largest companies in the industry probably operate on 1.5% to 3% overhead, and kind of the mid-range, maybe 3 to 5% overhead, and the smaller companies 5% plus overhead even. So, maybe as high as 10 and 15%, which is partly a matter of size, but it's also partly a matter of markets. What we find among our most successful people is they always have one or two high profit niches that they work on. For some, that might be their self-performance. Others are in the industrial market where the going margin might be 20 to 25%, again, because they put more value on things like quality and time versus worrying about your fee. But then on the other side, of course, is the low fee part of the market, which I talked about earlier, which you might call the commodity part of the market, which is okay to have, but if that's all you have, it's hard to really make a difference between your overhead. I talked about the hedgehog principle. Well, for me, the driving equation that defines success in construction is simply gross profit minus overhead. So, if you have overhead 2 to 3% and you're competing mostly for 2 to 3% work, well, you don't have to be a math genius to figure out that doesn't make you the most successful. So it's those niches, though, that mixed in can make that work as a whole. They also do tend to have diversity from various sectors and things like that. If they're too focused, their success fluctuates with the economy. And again, I mentioned this in your strategic plans, but focus on gross margin, not volume. The next success we do see is, the most successful companies really are operationally strong. And I just tried to cite a few of the things here that you really need to do well in any construction business. And the first, and I mean, this is the holy grail of construction, if there is one, is really the job cost reviews. First contractor I ever went into, there was a sign on the wall that said, if you don't inspect, don't expect. And this is really what the job cost review really comes down to. I've heard about some great systems out there, but remember, this is not even just looking at job costs to see which jobs are going sideways. This is about, you want to make sure the buyout is done timely. You want to make sure that you're not at risk for change orders. I think with the Carillion disaster here recently, if you look deep into that, there probably were a lot of outstanding change orders or claims that maybe they thought they were going to get and weren't going to get. Well, at any time in your company, you have a certain number of those, and those are things that put you at risk. So in your job review, you want to make sure that you're looking at those very strongly and looking at those constantly. And then even your submittal schedules and things like that. Make sure that's part of the review, because you have the knowledge to see, wow, you haven't got the windows bought out and the submittals in for that yet. Well, that's a long lead time item. And how are you going to get the project on time if you haven't got this done on time?
Yeah, one of the things that a meeting that Dennis and I sat in on recently was that it's still shocking in the year 2018, but the contractor, and a very enlightened contractor too, still was not sharing job cost information with the superintendents in the field who were expected to execute the work.
Yeah, we actually have a lot of those still, and it's but again, the ones who are most successful do share job cost information and job cost detail, particularly those of you who are running men. How can they run their men efficiently if they don't know how they're doing? Again,
yeah.
So that kind of goes back to the setting targets, but if you don't inspect, don't expect. So next item, proper capitalization. Probably won't spend too much time here, but obviously, if we look at the failures category, capitalization is one of the things they would emphasize a great deal here. And again, as leaders, if you want to grow your company, it takes capital. So sometimes what I find is some people have too many personal needs, so they end up, wanting to take their first profits out personally, to build their lake house and whatever. Those things will come. As a contractor, you need, if you want to grow your business, you need to invest in your business. And certainly many of you here are in the bonding world, so you probably like me to say this, but but obviously you can't grow your business without capital. So that's got to be one of the first things people attend to as they're building. And you do get to a point eventually where there's a right amount of capital, and then there's excess capital that you need to run your business. And sometimes simply for personal protection reasons, it's good to have an account outside of the company, a rainy day fund. I have quite a few contractors that actually have a rainy day fund, and if that has to be committed for bonding, that's okay too.
Well, many of you remember a blog that we did called Mistakes That Millionaires Make, and that was one of the recommendations, that when people became super successful and their companies were on an amazing growth trajectory, the guy that wrote the book, Harry Clark, one of his recommendations was take $1 million, when you can afford it, take $1 million and put it somewhere absolutely safe, and let that be your rainy day money. And if heaven and earth crash down around you, at least you can buy groceries for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. So this last item, just modest owner leader lifestyles. When I look at the successful companies, I don't see the leader doing flamboyant things and things like that. I look at all of these leaders, and they lead an understated lifestyle. And that was one of the keys to success also in Good to Great that they identified, was that steady, understated leadership. So that really is one of the success factors that I see.
The tortoise in the hare,
huh? So be data smart. I already gave you one quote for the day. Well, here's your next one. What gets measured gets done.
Yeah.
And again, that's something I don't know who said it, who to attribute that to, but I've seen it on the walls in construction companies, and I'm a believer. So, if you have lots of divisions or sectors that you're dealing in, track your profitability by group, by sector, by location. Track your performance by project manager, by superintendent. I already mentioned that success formula, gross profit minus overhead, pretty simple. But that would say that you need to control overhead, the overhead side of that too.
Well, it's just amazing to me with the simple things you see. So I was talking to a businessman in the upper Midwest, and he's got 3 locations. And I asked him, and his daughter was running one of the locations, and he was talking about how well she was doing. And I said, well, how is her profitability relative to the other 2 offices? And he said, well, we don't know. It all just rolls up into one big income statement. And I'm like, wait a minute. You've got 3 profit centers. Why don't you just break them? It seemed like common sense to me. But, you just get so busy. You're trying to run work, and you're trying to hire people, and you're trying to keep customers happy. And, it's hard to run a business.
Yeah. But going back to the strategic planning thing of doing more of what you do well and are profitable with, and less of what's not so successful, well, you have to know what those are in order to do that planning. So when I said control overhead wisely, there is a downside to not enough overhead. You can't grow without proper supervision and a proper layer of oversight and support for your people. And what we see, and I know one of the dangers certainly to the bonding industry, is growing too fast. And what that means is you don't have the infrastructure to support that growth and the talent to support that growth. So if you have a goal to grow, you've got to have the goal to grow your infrastructure, or you won't grow successfully. So overhead works both ways. You can not have enough, or you can have too much. So the whole key there is to be right sized. And then dashboards, the next item. The 3 things that contractors probably don't track that they should track. Number 1 is gain and fade per project, and keeping that on a monthly basis, and also keeping track of what kind of relationship that is. Do I normally operate with 4 gains to each fade, a 80% gain to fade ratio, or am I normally 50-50? Because institutionally, you might have some of that built in, but most importantly is you want to see the trends. And this might help if you don't have enough oversight. If you're used to being 4-to-1 on gain to fade, and all of a sudden you're 50-50, there's something going wrong. Mm-hmm. So pay attention to that. Also follow days gained and lost on your projects on a regular basis. And then change orders outstanding. I already mentioned that that's one of the big risk factors, but how many of our contractors actually on a monthly basis look at how much they have outstanding in change orders, either signed or unsigned, that are at risk for the company at any given time. And if that number is too high, that represents a risk to the organization as a whole. And then forecasting and tracking, remember they always need to look forward as well. All right, we're coming down to the end here, and finally we get to the reasons contractors fail in a lot of cases, which is effective risk management. And since most of you are in the bonding business who are on this, I don't want to belabor this, but most companies don't have a system to really bring people to the problems, to be able to run to problems instead of run from problems. And you want to make sure that you're not only finding out the information that something's going sideways early, but you have enough people in oversight that you can run to the problem and solve it very quickly and very effectively. And then, of course, avoiding bad jobs is probably even more important. Not out kicking your coverage, being super careful when you're trying to, do work of a type you haven't done before, contract type you haven't done before, geographically outside your trade area. Those are all, reasons for things to go badly. So the important thing there as a company is you have an effective go, no-go. You have an effective risk management program with regards to your subcontractors, and you have an effective problem solution sort of thing, risk mitigation, so when something's going wrong, you're effective at fixing it. So what kind of questions do we have that we can answer?
Anybody want to lob a few softballs there?
Surely we could not have covered everything possible here, or we put you to sleep. That could be the other alternative.
Well, we do want to give you a wrap up here, but yeah, there's a question about the book. It's Who by Jeff Smart, and it really is. It's an amazing book. It's got it so well thought through and so well scripted that if you just, I know you can't copy the pages, that's an infringement, but still, if you just follow the scripts they give you in the book and the how-to, you almost can't screw up hiring. It's really quite amazing. So get the book, and Jeff Smart has to send me a thank you note for pumping up his book sales today, but it really is quite an amazing book.
Yeah, I should conclude from my end. Again, we looked at our most successful contractors, and these are the characteristics we found, and not all of them have all 10 of these in spades.
Right.
I would say all of them are not super deficient in any of them, and they probably have like 7 of the 10 that they're operating on all cylinders. But the leadership is such that they're always striving to be better at each of these. And so that's sort of the point of those characteristics. So the steps, you can do if you're in the construction business, first of all, define success, work on your business rather than simply in your business, spend some time on leadership versus doing the business.
And one of the things that I would think that every contractor, and probably a lot of the agents and underwriters listening also, but trying to get control of your life and find a way where you're not working 80 hours a week, you're working 60 on your way down to 50. Seems like the most successful people work around 50 hours a week. That just sends working beyond 50 doesn't add that much incremental quality to the job you're doing, and it detracts a great deal from the quality of your life. You're missing your kids' events at school, and your spouse is upset because you are you're never around when it's dinner time or holidays or whatever. So we have a question here. What's one of the most important things you found out that attracts and more importantly keeps new employees?
Well, it's very interesting. A lot of it does go back to the why still, but you also have to have the basics. You have to have a good system of pay, incentives, benefits. You have to have that on sort of a plus level, regardless of the culture and everything else, because employees, I read another thing yesterday where the number of employees expecting to change jobs in the next 5 years used to be like 30%, now it's 55%.
Yeah, that's right.
Almost a ridiculous number. So people are mobile, so you do have to have the basics. So
it all comes down to culture, though. So I was talking to probably the most successful contractor in America, just an amazingly successful company and leader. And we were talking about incentive plans, and he said, Wayne, there are a lot of great incentive plans out there, and we have some of our own. But the biggest incentive plan is to have a great company where people love to come to work in the morning. And if you can work on the culture and create a culture where people are pulling together as a team and subscribing to the mission and sharing a common vision, man, that's what it's all about. And incentive plans, they're fine, but that's kind of bottom up. Top down work is where you need to be.
Yeah.
So Lori, I think we have a hand raised. So can we ask a real live question from a human being?
We sure can. All right, Anthony, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. You're unmuted. You may ask your question.
Thank you. I just now noticed that I could actually type this question, so I apologize for that. But my question is, I'm wondering as a contractor if there's a correlation in what you see with success on a contractor's bonding program and what their backlog is. In other words, if they're running close to the max backlog versus middle of the road versus not utilizing much of their bonding program.
I'm going to say no to the extent that, and it's interesting, some of my most successful companies have high profit private work that doesn't require a bond. So as far as, and as they grow, though, they do tend to grow into sectors that do require bonds. So I think they're great future
some of it's economy
customers.
driven, right? So in 2012, there was public work coming out and no private work, or 2010 rather.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Some of it's driven by the marketplace, but I'm not sure there's a direct correlation though.
But when it comes to success and backlog versus where their bonding program is, of course, what we're finding now is because of the growth in the market and the growth of our people that, they're pushing their bonding programs. And there's a dual thing going on here. Backlogs as a percentage of revenue for our groups has actually grown by about 25%. So backlogs have grown 25% faster than revenue over the last 5 years. So what I attribute that to is more long-term work, and there's more work involving pre-construction, so it's not starting as soon. I'm also seeing a lot of projects push from their expected starting date also. So that means backlog versus revenue is getting higher. So I think there's an element of that, and the way you look at your business, as a bonding company, you may need to have more flexibility for folks. And as long as they're growing profitably and their organizational base is able to handle that growth that's in front of them, I think you're probably okay and should be trying to strategize to please the customer and meet their needs. But of course, if those other things are not in place, obviously that puts them at more risk.
All right, so we're coming down to it on time. So we want to just talk about the 5 steps you take. Number 1, define success. Maybe you do create a hedgehog concept, Anthony, that has a correlation between bonding and backlog, or maybe there's some customer satisfaction or employee morale metric that you can put together. Work on your business rather than simply in the business. Number 3, put together that business plan with your team. If the old saying is right that 2 heads are better than 1, what about the top 7 people in your organization, or the top 8? You put 8 brains, 8 intelligent people around the table, and some good things are going to come out of it. The next thing is a little bit self-serving, but I'll tell you a story about that. Join a peer group. If you can find a peer group like Vistage or something like that in your town, and you can sit around with other business owners and share frustrations and successes and opportunities and just all kinds of things, it really becomes an intimate group. And Dennis and I joined a peer group about, 4 years ago now, something like that. Anyway, it has been transformational for us. It really has. I look forward to my meetings, and We meet once every 6 months, and golly, I just get so energized about them. And you'll find the same thing to be the case. And then the final thing is create an environment where you can enjoy the journey. I look at our contractors, and my heart just breaks for some of you because, golly, you work so hard for so long and just nose to the grindstone for years and even decades. And then so many people wake up at age 60 or 65 and they're really tired and they would like to be able to, reap the rewards for all those years of hard work. And they look around and they don't have a team. They don't have a son or a daughter or a really talented non-family executive that they can turn the company over to. They still have to be there, for on bid day to manage everything. They can't take time off. They can't take vacations. And, you can have it all as a contractor, as an agent, as an underwriter. You can have it all, but you can't just back into it. It's inspected and expected, right? You've got to do it by design. So many contractors are engineers, and the one thing they fail to engineer is a great life for themselves. They engineer good businesses, but they don't always engineer good lives. And that's the thing that you can do. You can have it all, and you just have to put together a plan to make it happen. So I think we're about out of time. Do we recommend diversity in other businesses other than construction? Well, sure. Diversity of opinion, diversity of, I think the only thing you don't want diversity in is intelligence. You want a bunch of intelligent people.
Yeah. But in balance, if you set out on a path that you don't have the talent, know-how and a good plan to get there, you can fail also. So even in construction, if you're trying to accomplish too many things in too many places, you probably find it splinters your effort. So diversification is good to the extent that we're in a cyclical industry and not all parts of our industry go up and down at the same time. So really helps to have a good balance, so you can weather those economic times.
I think I misunderstood the question. Okay, so in terms of wrapping up, so tomorrow you'll get an email from us and it will have the PowerPoint presentation, the webinar recording, and our white paper, the top 10 reasons contractors succeed. And it'll also have some contact information. So if you have other questions or some of these very specific questions about software and JVs and things like that, we're an open book. For ask anything you want, and we'll try to get you a substantive answer. Thanks very much from Dennis and me here at the Family Business Institute, and we hope you have a terrific balance of 2018, and we'll look forward to catching up with you again in September.
Thanks a lot.